I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, so I'm going to mess it up. But let's talk about El Salvador. Do you know anything about El Salvador?
Only a little bit from what Dan has already covered, which
Yeah.
is that they've been locking up people with face tattoos across the country, and things seem to be going quite well.
Yeah, I don't know much about it either, but I thought I'd cover some of it. President Nayib Bukele, I think that's his name, has been doing things that I think are very interesting because he is essentially fighting against the Assyrian Empire. And I mention that not as a casual segue because the people he has been locking up are actually tyrannical and evil and actually do operate like the ancient Assyrians, which we've been covering, Bo and I, in a long series of podcasts on the website, which you can go sign up for every month. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about in history because the Assyrians are just mad. They're just so mad.
I have watched this, and Bo's discomfort at the descriptions, the gleeful descriptions with which the Assyrians tortured adolescent boys and girls and flayed people alive, does sound like the kind of thing the cartels do today.
No. That's too small. Entire cities of people they would torture and flay, create pillars of skulls and hedgerows of impaled people after burning the entire city down and walking away with everything it contained. So the Assyrians basically operate like MS-13 operate, which is why I'm recommending you go watch that first, because you'll get a sort of slice of the genuine depravity and violence that El Salvador has been plagued with, right? So let's begin by just exploring who are MS-13, for anyone who doesn't know. Now, I'm just going to say, I'm not an expert on any of these subjects. I'm not an expert in El Salvadorian politics, not an expert on MS-13. So I'm just going to use the most surface level sources that anyone can find. Just a quick Google search will bring up everything that we have here. And if it's even slightly accurate to what's going on, well, this is kind of monstrous, and to oppose the solving of this problem would surely put you in league with evil, right? So as the Wikipedia page for MS-13 says, the Mara Salvatrucha gang originated in Los Angeles, set up in the 80s by Salvadorian immigrants in the city's Pico Union neighborhood who immigrated to the United States after the Central American Civil Wars of the 1980s. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Salvadorian asylum seekers were refused asylum in the US and instead classified as undocumented migrants. In the very beginning, MS-13 was a group of young, delinquent heavy metal fans who lived in Los Angeles. However, the undocumented community in Los Angeles was subject to severe racial prejudices and persecution. Under these conditions, MS-13 began to mutate into a gang. Originally, the gang's main purpose was to protect Salvadorian immigrants from the other, more established gangs of Los Angeles, who were predominantly composed of Mexicans, Asians, and African Americans. Some of the original members of MS-13 adhered to Satanism. While the majority of contemporary MS-13 members do not identify as Satanists, the Satanist influence is still seen in some of their symbolism.
Right. But if there were let's say the EDL, for example.
If
someone
they were founded by
depicted
Nazis, and they had swastikas in their symbolism, although most were like, yeah, no, I don't really believe in that, they'd still call it a Nazi gang.
And some, I assume, are good people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are we okay to call MS-13 a satanic gang?
This is why Trump did call them animals how many years ago, I would assume.
I mean, they are literally monstrous.
Yeah.
The BBC has a nice little report. We'll go through a few things. And this was in 2017 before it was too big a deal. I mean, Trump had mentioned it. So they were trying to run defense, but it doesn't sound good. MS-13 has been accused of recruiting poor and at-risk teenagers. Joining is said to require being jumped in, which is subject to a vicious 13-second beating, and getting wet, carrying out a crime, often a murder, for the gang. So to join the gang, you're probably going to become a murderer.
Right. So with the framing here, it says that they're recruiting poor and at-risk teenagers. Okay, sure, I can accept that. But then this article and the Wikipedia consolidation of all other articles and reporting from before always seems to blame civilization for the creation of these gangs, because somehow the racist superstructure of the United States is a unique catalyst which produces a Hobbesian war against all. And so you are exculpating the responsibility of the individual criminals for playing football with people's heads by saying, but my white supremacy. And I just think that's reprehensible.
On the plus side, they don't actually mention that in this article. The implication might be looming over it, but they don't focus on that. They do tell us, though, that MS-13's motto is, quote, kill, rape, control. That's their motto. The motto of the satanic gang is kill, rape, control. Okay. And that's just according to the FBI. I mean, what do the FBI know?
Increasingly less these days, but on this matter, I might be.
I'm
trust them.
prepared to take their word on this. And of course, as you can see, the gang's annual revenue is $31 million, according to Salvadorian police operations. So they're a very, very big, successful gang. Of course, they've got tens of thousands of members who are not allowed to leave. They get killed if they leave the gang.
Right. So there's a price for apostasy.
Yes, you have to kill to get into the gang. You're not allowed to leave the gang. And your mission statement is kill, rape, and control. And so obviously you get a lot of deaths, rapes, and organized crime.
Right. So they're just a marauding horde that need to be dealt with.
Yeah, they actually are quite similar to the Assyrians. They're so bad they get their own prisons. This the Penal de Ciudad Barrios is a prison just for the gang members, and it's run by the gang members in El Salvador because they're just... No one wants to be their prison guards. You've got a prison full of murderous gang members.
No one would want to be their tattoo artist either, because imagine if you screw up.
Well, they do it to each other, I imagine.
Oh, well, yeah.
It's part of the initiation, I imagine. Anyway, so this was all information from a few years ago. So fast forward to March 2022, and you've got literally 1,000 murders in El Salvador a year. Now, El Salvador has a population of about 6.2 million. So that's a really unbelievably high number of gang murders. And they declared a state of emergency in March after there were 62 gang killings in one day. Their parliament approved this state of emergency because it was the most violent 24-hour period since the end of the Civil War in 1992. So it's only more dangerous when there's an active war going on in El Salvador. I mean, it's just literally one of the most dangerous places in the world because of these gangs, right? This equates to 18 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants for the 2021 murder rate, which was 1,140 murders. But that was a 30-year low. So we got it down to 140 murders this year.
There was a...
Thumbs up.
The head of University of Kent psychology department, he was from El Salvador, and he had fled specifically because when he was a young man, he wasn't involved in the gangs, but they'd cut some of his fingers off with a pair of pliers.
Just monstrous.
Not particularly any reason, just because you were in the territory in the wrong place and wrong time. So
they are genuinely monstrous. Previously, in November 2021, another spate of violence had led to 40 people being killed within 3 days. I mean, these are just insane numbers of lives ruined. And then think about all of the people who are related to them, who have now lost a family member. And think about these are not just going to be quick deaths either. A lot of these will be people tortured to death. People who are just brutalized. Right? And so President Nayib Bukele, who was elected in 2019 on promises to fight organized crime. And as I understand it, he comes from outside of their two-party structure.
Right.
And he won 52% of the vote, which is a massive, that'd be like UKIP insurging to solve this problem. He said, "We have a new spike in homicides, something we've worked hard to reduce. While we fight criminals in the streets, we must figure out what is happening and who is financing this. The country must let the agents and soldiers do their job and must defend them from the accusations of those who protect the gang members." But for some reason, there are lots of people on the side of the gang members. Isn't that weird? You've got this monstrous satanic gang that's terrorizing a country, and you've got this guy who's like, look, we need to deal with these gangs. And there are a bunch of people on the side of the gangs.
So there are two possible reasons I could think of for that. One is vested interests in the cartels and getting financed by them, which Harry and I have done a podcast on the website that we cannot mention if this goes up on YouTube, but you can figure it out from an American state yourself. Yeah. And the other reason would be, as I said about the Wikipedia article and the BBC article's framing, is the Foucauldian perspective on the civilization itself is oppressing them, and so the only way they can fight back against their oppression and express their authentic nature is through criminal violence.
No.
Right, okay.
The answer is malliberalism. But what about the liberal nature, the liberal tradition of El Salvador? Have you considered the damage this has done to liberalism in El Salvador, locking up all these monstrous, murderous gang members? You hadn't thought about it, had you? You hadn't thought about the divine, transcendent nature of the liberal order and how it's not being applied to El Salvador.
No, I hadn't, because for all the murder victims, they can't exercise liberalism if they're dead.
That's right. You weren't thinking about this. Juan Papier from the international campaign group Human Rights Watch tweeted the measures were very worrying, especially in a country where there are no independent democratic institutions. What are you talking about? There are literally people being murdered in the street, dozens of them every single day. And you're like, yeah, but my Human Rights Watch. It's like, no, what? What are you talking about? Why can't we stop the murderers? Right? So obviously, President, again, I can't pronounce his bloody name, Bukele. I assume I'm pronouncing that right. If you go to the next video, just so you can see, you can play this in the background so you got no sound, so without the sound. Right? This is 50,000. Not this. This is not the entire one, but 50,000 gang members, which we can just call murderers, have been arrested, and they're treated like the animals that they are, and they're being locked up in a mega prison.
This does look like something out of a Batman comic.
Yeah.
Like you've rounded up all of the Joker's goons.
Yeah. But the Joker's goons weren't this bad. just to tell you, these people are worse than the Joker's goons.
Naruto run, I'm sorry, for our audio listeners, because their hands are cuffed behind their heads, they have to run with their head down and their hands behind their back.
You do not take any chances with these people.
No, and not being funny, humiliation is at least the least that they deserve.
Yeah, exactly. The least that they deserve. I mean, personally, I would go further. But anyway, and so I thought we'd go to the Washington Post covering this.
Right.
Let's watch.
Last year, the country's president asked Congress for emergency powers to temporarily suspend some constitutional rights after a massive spike in murders attributed to gang crime. It includes that arrests can be made without a warrant and detainees no longer have a right to a lawyer. Private communications of all citizens can also be accessed by the government. Since then, about 64,000 suspects have been arrested, and murder reports fell about 57%.
That's why it was a historic low.
Yeah.
Because the president had spent the last 2 years nailing these gangs.
Did you notice as well, again for audio listeners who didn't see that, the people who were taking the mugshots sat behind the desks had the masks on. So they were wearing full face coverings. The riot cops were wearing the same thing. So you could presume that that's to protect them from tear gas or projectiles. So either the prison is so susceptible to the riots that the people in the desk jobs need to wear protective gear at all times, or they need to have their face masked so that the information about their identities doesn't leak to the outside so their families aren't targeted for prosecuting these gangs.
Yes.
That is the level of threat these people are under just for processing active criminals who demark themselves from the population by having full body and face tattoos.
Yes. This is, again, murderous satanic gang.
Yeah.
Like, it's so weird that these are the people. But the complaint is, well, you're monitoring all the communications of the people in that country. So, hello, GCHQ. What? You've been doing this for years.
Yeah, the Patriot Act. Ring any bells?
Yeah, when's Edward Snowden coming home?
Yep.
Sorry, and then, oh, well, you're locking people up without due process. Yes, just like the January 6th people who are still in jail.
I will also say that I am totally against government digital surveillance, and I'm not even sure if it's necessary here because, again, they tattoo their faces for you.
Yeah,
they're quite easy to spot.
The only thing I can say is, well, they don't get access to lawyers. It's like, yeah, they don't.
Oh,
That's
no.
too bad.
Anyway.
That's too bad. Yeah, I don't care. Sorry, the murderous gang where you have to murder someone to become a member of the gang and then terrorize an entire country, multiple countries.
The mission statement is rape.
Yeah. The mission statement is literally kill, rape, control. I don't really have that much sympathy. If the situation were reversed, I don't think they'd be giving me many lawyers either. But anyway, let's go to the next one. MSNBC News.
Tonight, mass arrests in El Salvador continue. The country's president, Nayib Bukele, doubling down on what he has called a war on gangs. The government announcing that at least 50,000 people have been arrested since late March. Arrests that they have then touted across social media for months, using the hashtag war against gangs, and taking to Twitter yet again, this time to say the exception has made it possible to intensify the war against gangs and get thousands of terrorists off the streets.
Over 1% of the Salvadoran population has been detained under the state of emergency and is being held without basic rights to defense.
Oh, the basic rights of these murdering rapists.
Oh, and they all had the gang tattoos.
They all had the gang tattoos.
So, excuse me if I'm not suspicious that you're mass imprisoning people that don't deserve it, and more so that El Salvador has a massive population of murderous raping gang members.
Yes, 1% of the population is a member of the kill, rape, control gang.
There's a lot of concordance with Pakistani communities in Telford, but we won't go into that here.
These people actively mark themselves as part of this gang, right? But I love the phrase, he's doubling down on this war against the gang. So really, I bet that's made him really popular, actually, in El Salvador.
That was the interesting thing I saw about the social media post. The way he does the messaging is very Trumpian. So
yeah.
if you noticed about, he's got a galvanizing hashtag, he's got the country's national flag next to it, he's got really clear mission statements, and then the curated graphic is of a riot cop arresting one of the gang members with the presidential seal over the top.
Brilliant.
That's the similar message you see out of the Trump administration.
I mean, Trump's problems weren't quite this bad, thank God. But again, like, he's doubling down on this war against the gangs. It's like, why should he be? I mean, look at the framing there. It's like, well, he said he's declared war against gangs. We've criticized him for that, but he's doubled down on it. It's like, no, that's good.
Yep.
That's absolutely good. If you're just a regular person in El Salvador, you want him to exterminate these gangs. They should not be on the streets, right? And this clip went around. Now, this is about 2 minutes long, but I want us to watch it. And if you're just listening to the audio, unfortunately, I can't just translate it in real time. But it is a fantastic speech that he gave, and I think we should listen to it.
Llevamos 8 meses en esta guerra contra las pandillas y gracias a Dios la estamos ganando. Esta es una victoria demasiado sorprendente que está ahí cerca. Que quede claro que la gloria es para Dios y que es de Dios. Nosotros los seres humanos tenemos la dicha de ser instrumentos de Dios, todos nosotros, para llevarle paz, libertad y felicidad al pueblo salvadoreño. Y nosotros somos el instrumento para sanar esta tierra. Cada uno de ustedes son un instrumento de Dios para hacerlo. La paz no se consigue firmando acuerdos entre corruptos, repartiéndose el poder entre asesinos. La paz se construye con trabajo, con sudor, con esfuerzo y con la valentía que tienen ustedes y sus hermanos policías. Debe tener algo que le indica que uno es parte de algo más importante que uno mismo y que vale la pena arriesgar la vida por eso que es más importante que uno mismo. Son valores, valores como la valentía, como el coraje, como la fortaleza, la disciplina, el patriotismo, el honor, la lealtad, el amor por el prójimo. Son valores fundamentales de la sociedad humana, pero son valores que se están perdiendo cada vez más en el mundo. Si ustedes ven noticias internacionales, se van a dar cuenta cómo los valores más importantes que tiene el ser humano, como el honor, la lealtad, la valentía, el coraje, el amor por el prójimo, son precisamente los valores que cada día se pierden más, que cada día hay menos. Y por eso ven como sociedades que parecía que ya lo habían logrado, ahora se van degradando, porque están perdiendo los valores que los hicieron grandes. Valores que probablemente no eran fuertes en esta tierra, y sí eran fuertes en otras tierras. Y por eso es que esas tierras crecieron y se hicieron grandes. Pero esos valores los están perdiendo ellos ahora. Y por el contrario, en El Salvador, los valores que antes estaban degradados en nuestro país, ahora son los más importantes. Y si no, mírense ustedes, hombres y mujeres jóvenes, que tienen todos estos valores. ¿Cómo no va a surgir una nación con valores así? ¿Cómo no va a surgir una nación que pone primero a Dios y que luego pone su trabajo y su esfuerzo con este tipo de valores?
So for audio listeners, President Gigachad there just decided to say we're soldiers of God, and that's the mandate that we're going to take as El Salvadorian patriots to crush these gangs that have been destroying our country and make El Salvador a safe haven for the values of courage, love, and common brotherhood that have been retreating from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And some of those shots from the helicopter genuinely look like shots of Lord of the Rings preparing to fight in the Return of the King battle at Minas Tirith.
And they're actually fighting satanic evil gangs.
I think I might move to El Salvador, actually. There we go. As soon as he gets it cleaned up. Haven't they adopted Bitcoin as one of their national currencies as well? And that's led to a...
I did hear about that, but I don't know anything about it, so I'm not going to bring it up.
Dan's mentioned it before, and he says it has led to some good economic outcomes. It seems they're
Right.
having a bit of renaissance at the moment.
But the point is, he's right. You know, they're adopting the values of hard work, courage, and loyalty. Of course, you're going to win. Anyway, so here's Wikipedia bio. Again, go over to this. I thought this was just an interesting thing, where they can't even make him sound bad, frankly. Because what are you going to say, right? El Salvador's murder rate has decreased to historic lows during Bukele's tenure, falling by over 50% in his first year in office. Although Bukele attributed the decrease in murders to his deployment of thousands of police and soldiers to gang strongholds and increase in prison security, his government has been accused by the United States of secretly negotiating with MS-13. Well, okay, let's say he did. He was like, look, we're going to crush you. Get your act in line or something like that. Okay, fine. Like, what? you take any option you can to start reducing the problem. But I mean, he did arrest 66,000 members of the gang.
Well, it's also he's inherited the mess. He hasn't caused it.
Yeah.
So any steps he's doing to take it are laudable.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he secretly, I'm not even going to talk about who you secretly negotiate with. Jesus Christ. Like, but even then, okay, that's the worst allegation they have against him. Oh, you were secretly negotiating with them.
Well,
Yeah,
hold
but
on.
I did crush them.
Under the Fast and Furious scandal, the Obama administration literally armed MS-13 by giving them illegal guns.
They literally armed the Taliban by leaving $66 billion worth of equipment there.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, what kind of pathetic judgment is this, right? But anyway, in March 2022, they arrested 66,000 people with alleged gang affiliations, and Bukele has maintained high approval ratings among Salvadorians throughout his tenure, but has been accused of governing in an authoritarian manner.
Oh no. Anyway,
Do you want to know what his approval rating is?
it's upwards of 90%, isn't
It
it?
is 90%. Yeah,
Yep.
It's around 90%. Like, that's how well approved of this policy of destroying the satanic gang for God is in El Salvador. I just can't find it in myself to find a critique of this.
And we have Rishi Sunak.
I mean, I'm glad we don't have the problems they have, but like, this is great.
I mean, we will do with the amount of Albanians that keep coming in.
Yeah. But anyway, so the thing that sparked all this off was I saw this article in the New York Times, right? El Salvador decimated its ruthless gangs, but at what cost? Any cost. Do you understand? Any cost. Like, literally, the El Salvador are saving their own little world, and the New York Times is like, yeah, but what about liberalism? It's like, I don't care. I just don't care. There are no longer murderous gangs controlling the country. Like, that's the achievement, and the price you pay for it is whatever it takes. New York Times. Like, this is just an embarrassing article, right? El Salvador, the smallest country in Central America, was once known as the hemisphere's murder capital, with one of the highest homicide rates anywhere in the world outside of a war zone. But in the years since the government declared a state of emergency to quell gang violence, deploying the military onto the streets in force, the nation has undergone a remarkable transformation. Now, children play soccer late into the evening on fields that were gang turf. Miss Iglesias gathers soil for her plants next to an abandoned building that residents say was used for gang killings. Homicides plunged. Extortion payments imposed by gangs on businesses and residents, once an economy unto itself, also declined. You can walk freely, Miss Iglesias says. So much has changed. El Faro, El Salvador's leading news outlet, surveyed the country earlier this year and delivered a stunning assessment. The gangs largely do not exist. Sorry, why is this bad? What? A win for order and liberty, one might argue?
Children playing. Oh, the horror.
Yeah. But that achievement, critics say, how can there be a critic of this? Like, what kind of monster is like, well, I am going to stand up for MS-13 here. Like, just, I know that it was hell that you were living through because of the satanic gang, but, right, this has come at an incalculable price. Mass arrests that swept up thousands of innocent people, the erosion of civil liberties, and the country's descent into an increasingly autocratic police state. Right, liberalism. It's not a liberal haven in El Salvador. No, because it was hell. Liberalism can't actually fix the problems of El Salvador. So El Salvador's president had to be like, look, we're just going to rely on God and do what we think is the right thing. And they fixed all of the problems.
This does cement my view that you basically need God for liberalism to work.
Well, that's John Locke's view. There's literally every Enlightenment thinker's view.
Well, except for Rousseau, who thought we were natural savages, and it seems to be that
Well,
he's been proven right here.
Rousseau was a Christian as well.
Debatable.
No, he absolutely was.
Didn't look after his kids.
And no, yeah, of course not. I'm not saying he was a good Christian, but he doesn't deny the existence of God. Anyway, they carry on. Most Salvadorians appear to be willing to accept the deal. Right. Okay, we're going to be slightly less liberal, and we're going to get rid of the murderous gangs. And most Salvadorians are like, I'll take that. I'd like to be able to not be killed. But
Low bar, admittedly.
Yeah,
but
yeah. And the New York Times is like, but have you considered liberalism? It's like, well, why would they? You know, liberalism is for countries that don't have gigantic murderous gangs terrorizing everyone. Fed up with the gangs that terrorize them and force so many to flee to the United States, the vast majority of people here support the measures and the president behind them, surveys suggest. Yes. With approval ratings around 90%, El Salvador's president, the 41-year-old Nayib Bukele, has become one of the most popular leaders, in the world's most popular leaders, and has earned fans across the Western Hemisphere.
oh, I think there's a mask-off moment in there, though.
Go on.
Fed up with the gangs that terrorized them and forced so many to flee to the United States, the New York Times might be petrified that there's no longer a legitimate reason to import a voter base.
I mean, that is a fair critique of the New York Times' motivations. But either way, I am not surprised that 90% of Salvadorians are like, no, this was good. This was just a genuine win. And if liberalism was going to stand in the way of that, then it's liberalism that has to bend. Because, I mean, it's not like once all of the problems are done, once all of the gangs are rounded up, dealt with, imprisoned, problem over, that they can't then engage in liberal reforms, right? That's, of course, something you can restore. But you can't impose liberalism on the gangs. They're not going to be like, oh, good point about human rights, you know. I was a member of a murderous satanic gang, but you did make a persuasive argument about, no, you've got to crush them. You have to crush them. And that's what Bukele has done, and everyone's thrilled with it. Brilliant job. New fan converted here. And that speech, I found that genuinely inspirational. Like the backhanded way he was like, look, other countries around the world are losing these values, and look at what's happening to them. Yeah, us. And look at what's happening to us. This guy gets it. But yeah, they carry on. As politicians from Mexico to Guatemala vow to emulate Mr. Bukele's iron-fisted approach. Iron-fisted? Iron-fistedly stop the satanic gangs from murdering children. Like, good. Yes, good. Just the open iron fist on the satanic gangs, please.
Excuse my skepticism about worry about overreach when they tattoo their faces.
Yeah. We know exactly who they are because they've literally got MS-13 on their foreheads. Like, sorry. No, I'm actually very much in favour of what has happened here. But critics have grown... Again, the critics... They can go spend some time with MS-13 and then see how critical they are of these policies, shall they? They've grown concerned about how the country could become a model for a dangerous bargaining, sacrificing civil liberties for safety. I remain incredibly pessimistic about what this means for the future of democracy in the region, says Christine Wade from the Washington College in Maryland. And it's like, you are so remote from the problem.
Right, woman of letters, completely far from the policies that she prescribes being acted out on the local people.
Yes. I mean, I'll take the grandmother, Mrs. Iglesias. I'll take her opinion because she literally had to live with it every goddamn day.
Yep.
I think she's much better informed on the problem of MS-13 than Christine Wade, an El Salvador expert at Washington College in Maryland. The risk is that this becomes a popular model for other politicians to say, well, we could provide you with more security in exchange for you giving up some of your rights. Why would I need so much security?
I wonder if Miss Wade ever wrote an article about the lockdowns.
But oh no, malliberalism is literally the only critique that they have of President Bukele's amazing job fixing one of the worst and most dangerous countries on earth. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Love it.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium podcast, this episode on Is Jesus Christ a Socialist? If you'd like to find out what else has been put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.